Welcome back to a D5 Football YouTube channel. This week we're with Sam from the Talking Talkie podcast. We're going to be speaking about the National League North and National League South being declared null and void, what implications this has for the National League, and the decision that the National League have decided to keep playing. First thing, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks, Nathan. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm good as well. And obviously, it's the second time you've been on. The first time was obviously you were talking about Torquay and why Torquay have been so good this season. We've got lots of other stuff on the channel as well. This is the first time that you're listening, so just go and have a look. But let's get straight into it. National League North and National League South have declared null and void. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a shame that it's come to that. I think it seems daft that everyone was in a position at the start of the season to say, yeah, let's carry on. Don't get me wrong, obviously, early on, I think the season started 3rd of October, wasn't it? And there were plans to be pilot testing of having some fans in stadiums at the time. I mean, obviously, it's important across football, but especially the lower down you get, because that is the kind of the main funding for clubs. However, I do think it's ludicrous, really, that it's got to this point when really there had to be plans. There had to be plans on the assumption that there is a good chance there will be no football fans throughout the season. Certain areas I was lucky enough to get to the Torquay games that whilst fans were in because we were in tier 2. Okay, a lot of the country weren't able to host fans or go to games, but we were okay. We managed to go and had fans in, but it does seem really daft that it feels like there was no plan in place for the scenario that there could be no fans in grounds.
I think that's just the problem really as well is that, like I said, that you've got all these. Obviously, would have been understanding that you got National League North, National League South teams all around the country, right up in the north, right up in the south, in the corner of the country, miles away. That you could, the scenario very well could have been that in and around your big cities, you wouldn't have allowed fans in because of high rates there. But in remote areas like a Torquay or, somewhere perhaps somewhere like a Newcastle or a Carlisle or someone miles away from everyone, they could have been allowed fans in. Obviously, those teams aren't in the National League or National League divisions, but, teams from around that area. You could have ended up with a scenario where you've got some, like we did see, with some fans have allowed in some teams, but not in others. And that creates a problem then. Well, if you're going to allocate funding, how would you allocate that? Because they've allowed fans in there making money, they're not. So it does bring up a lot of sort of questions as well. So it's quite a hard one. But if you leave it flat and just sort of say, okay, there's no sort of teams, no sort of fans in for any of the teams, allocating funding is the first question is where does that money come from? Is it going to be a grant or a loan? We're going to come to, obviously. And then how long can you have that for and stuff like that? And it's also that, yeah, to be fair to the clubs, it was sort of said, okay, it's going to be an October type of thing that we get back fans back in. And then it was sort of a bit later. And then now it looks like it might not be for the whole season. So who knows? Which is more of a government thing rather than the National League.
Yeah.
Sort of, it's out of their hands, really. So in general, really, the situation as I understand it is, and feel free to correct me, obviously, is up until Christmas time, they received funding from the National Lottery because they give out money for charities and stuff like that. And they gave out funding, I think it was around about £10 million to keep them going until December. And the National League say they thought that the government were going to give them a grant, and that's the key point, a grant to continue from December, Christmas time until end of the season. Once you got closer to that time, they sort of said, oh no, it wasn't a grant, it was a loan. That's what the government said. So the National League teams have now said, yeah, we can't afford to take on any sort of loans, even low interest ones, because there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to pay it back. And you could very well, and they've seen what has happened at clubs like Bolton and Bury when loans have been taken on. They're like, yeah, we can't risk the long-term survival of this football club that will be going for hundreds of years. We've seen Maidenhead, just the other week, 150th anniversary at their ground. They don't want to risk that type of history by, do you know what I mean? Clubs like that won't want to risk that. You've got Wrexham as well. They're, one of the oldest clubs. You've got Notts County and, clubs like this, the oldest clubs. They don't want to risk that. If they can survive financially, if they can survive something like that, fair enough, then they can, obviously Notts County have had a takeover, so they might be fine with that. But clubs of that nature, long histories, don't want to risk the long-term survival of their club. Just as Chester, they had all their problems and now they've come back. They don't want to risk that, which is completely understandable. And fans and people from the clubs are obviously annoyed that they thought they were going to be, say, if you like, would have bailed out for the entire season, subsidised for the entire season to keep going this season. And the general agreement obviously is for that would then keep the league going the season after, if and when fans are back in. We're talking the 2021-22 season, and that through the money generated, that would sort of pay for itself. That with your fans back in, that would keep the league would be of a higher value, and they would pay that back essentially through the tax, obviously, system. But the opposite seems now that sort of they've been left out, and had no money for the second half, which has left them in a position now where they can't really do much. It's either risk the long-term survival of your team or say no to 6 months of football and potential revenue that may come, and that's the keyword may, for a few games at the end of the season. It's not really worth it. If there were guarantees that fans would be in tomorrow, they might be able to say that, but they can't. So that's the problem we've got, really.
That's the thing. The whole thing has been it's been poor organisation from the National League. That's the long and short of it. So obviously the lottery gave the National League, I think it was the lottery, something from the government, but whatever it was, the National League received, I think it was £11 million. Now, they distributed that. So every team in the National League got the same amount, and then a little bit less went to every team in the North and South got the same amount, a little bit less than the National League clubs. Fine, their expenses are going to be less than the National League in theory. One of the problems is every club got the exact same amount. Now, these were to cover gate receipts, really. So it's a bit strange that, Boreham Wood, who pull in less than 1,000 most weeks, should get the same amount to cover gate receipts that Notts County would, because Notts County get 4,000 or 5,000 at this level. Okay, Boreham would have got a huge wage bill compared to most in the league, but that shouldn't be a factor. So that's one thing that they got wrong at the start. And then there's the issue with the grants and loan problem. So you've got two sets of incompetence, really. You've got the government, who, personal opinion, have done a poor job since the start of the pandemic. I won't get into politics too much. But then you've got the National League, who have done a poor job really for the last 5 or so years, but especially since all this started. Now, one set are lying. So clubs are all under the impression that it was promised as a grant, not a loan. That would have come from the National League. Now, the National League have either completely got it wrong and it was a loan originally, or the government have done another U-turn. Only the National League and the government know that. That's for us to we can speculate on that, but that's as good as we can do. I think the problem is there are a lot of clubs. So Torquay, we've got ownership that their sole mission is to get us into back into the Football League. And obviously we're top of the league, 7 points clear as it stands, with just under half the season's games left to play. So for them, it's well worth spending that bit extra without the revenue from fans to get up into the league. And you look at the National League table, and really, so Sutton are second on 37 points, and all the way down to Yeovil, Dagenham in 21st and 26 points. Really, they've all got a chance of getting into the playoffs. Because you look at the numbers, and I think, because Dover have now said they're not going to play any of their games, they furloughed their players. I think Kingsley and Wealdstone certainly voted to end the season, but apart from that, I can't name it. But most obviously voted to carry on, hence the National League will continue. And I do think fans will be allowed back in towards the end of the season. The Premier League, the chief executive of the Premier League was on TalkSport yesterday saying he fully expects fans to be back in over the next 2.5 months, which is great. And one of the things I was looking at is you look at the tables in the North and South, and they're going to be teams that are really aggrieved because, okay, the National League South, there's not loads and loads of quality. It's, when talking with the biggest clubs to ever be in that league, there are going to be clubs, anyone could win it any season in theory. But you look at the National League North, and there are always some really big players there. So Gateshead, York, Chester, Fylde, they're the teams you look at and think would be right up there, and they're all pushing there. But Gloucester, top of the league. Okay, Fylde got 3 games in hand on them, but Gloucester aren't going to be top of the league every season. You really got to feel for that club because they've done a brilliant effort to get there, and even if they didn't win the league, they've been robbed of what is probably one of the best seasons they'll have. Because they're one of the smaller teams at that level. So yeah, it's a complete mismanagement of. I think it breaks down to communication between the government and the National League. But yeah, who you blame? I'm not sure.
I guess it's also what we spoke about U-turns, and people familiar with the let's say UK situation would have been familiar with that term U-turns. You'd have to think though, if that was the intention of the government, then not to sort of make it too much that they would. Do we think that they would sort of go, well, let's tell them that they were going to give them grants or whatever, say it in a discreet way, make them think they're going to get grants, then we'll turn around and say, no, it's loans later on. Is it a case of they actually intended to, and they just financially now can't afford it? I don't know. In the context of like billions of pounds going through stuff, it is what, well, £10 million, say 10 million for the first half, 10 million for the second half. Even if we say 20 million, that's not a lot. We don't know. Is that a National League, or is it genuinely that they? I find it's hard to believe, really, because they're so incompetent, both of them, that they sort of didn't formally. They just sort of said, "Oh, we'll give you funding." Didn't formally say if it was grants or loans or anything like that. I find that hard to believe because I think if I was in that boardroom or whatever, if I'm in a situation, I want to absolutely double check everything. This sounds really strange. When I research podcast guests and stuff, I'm always double checking that the account is the actual account because I'm paranoid about that something could go wrong. So you've got to double check it. If I'm doing that for this, I imagine you've got millions of pounds moving over and survival of people's livelihoods. You'd have to do something more than that. In fact, maybe that's my logic. I don't know. Maybe they are.
Well, no, you've hit the nail on the head there when you say livelihoods, because it's not just getting football games played. That's what fans see. That's what the world sees. But really, you've got to know exactly if you've got all this money you're about to distribute, it is people's livelihoods. Because if you promise people grants and it turns out it's a loan, and say a club has taken on, I don't know, say a club's taken on £20,000, in the National League South, that's a huge amount of money. That's, in terms of semi-professional footballers, that's 2 players' salaries or gate receipts, whatever, that clubs will not be able to pay back. Now, there is a side element of, clubs could individually kind of put forward a case and say we need it as a grant if they can prove that they wouldn't be able to pay it back. And the interest rates were very good. I think it was about 2%, was it, from memory? And it was over kind of 10 or 15 years. So it sounded like the government did everything they can, if it was a loan, to make it as fair as possible in terms of repaying that loan. I think it came down to the National League Board. That's my guess, is that it seems to me like they knew that they were getting the grants to start with and assumed it would all be grants, maybe a bit of miscommunication from the government. I think both sides have been really incompetent and, quite frankly, quite disgraceful, in my opinion, throughout this whole saga.
Some other sort of caveats, if you like, to the whole situation is Wrexham. Now, for those not familiar with, I think we're going to have a lot of sort of people who aren't sort of familiar with the National League, perhaps watching this. The situation with that is Wrexham are a Welsh team. It's an English league, but there are a few Welsh teams like got a Cardiff and Swansea higher up the pyramid. So it creates this different sort of thing where they're under different sort of jurisdictions for stuff. Wrexham, being a Welsh club registered in Wales, would it be eligible for money from England, essentially, because of the devolution of Scotland? And, so they wouldn't have been eligible, essentially, which left them in a situation where they were like, we're not receiving any money either way, so they abstain and stuff like that. Now, it's okay for them because they've just been taken over by Hollywood billionaires. We did a video about that a few days ago. That's fine for them, but if you imagine they were a fan-owned, if there was fan-owned club or, like they were before, or very sort of small, they won't be able to, and they would be in serious, serious trouble and have to rely on the Welsh government, I imagine, to give them money. But I think even, if I remember correctly, Wales have even said, yeah, you're England, essentially. You're not getting anything. So they've been essentially like a game of tennis, waxed back and forth. No, you're English, you're Welsh, you're English, you're Welsh, whatever.
Yeah, it's been a really difficult one for Wrexham because obviously, like you say, they abstained from voting, so they didn't vote for any of the 4 resolutions, whatever. I think Wrexham have had a really tough deal out of it. Okay, in hindsight, they're absolutely fine because they've just been taken over, like you said, between 2, very rich film stars. I'm sure have got the best intentions for the club. But yeah, so they've obviously abstained. And then you could tell that some clubs were going to vote one way or another. I think a lot of clubs came out and publicly said, especially in the National League, we owe it to the integrity and honesty of football that we should continue the season, which I thought was really good because that is the thing. At the end of the day, all of these clubs agreed to start a season. It's very easy. So Dover have said, they've kind of outright said, we're not just voting to finish the season, we're already doing it. We furloughed all our players, we will not play any more games, which isn't good for the league. It's not. And I think you do wonder, because Dover have got a history of being a bit of a dodgy club. You wonder that if they were up in the playoffs, would they be doing the same thing? Because in theory, they'd still be at the same loss wherever they are on the table, but would they be taking that gamble if they're further up? So I think them doing it, you'd assume they've done that on the assumption that the North and South would finish and there would be no relegation. However, I think there should be actions taken against Dover, personally, whether that's kind of, if you refuse to play, you automatically get relegated. I don't think you deserve to keep your National League status if you're going to do that.
And that's sort of it, really. We had a podcast with Alex Whitmore, player of AFC Fylde, who we ended up sort of going about a little 10-minute, 15-minute rant, if you like, or discussion about sort of that. This was a few weeks ago, about 3rd of February, I think it was. So before all this, but talking about it, and his point of view as well, how important is precedent that we sort of said at the time we were halfway until we were the point of ending last season, average about 15 games, and the average was about 30. We finished last time. He sort of said, well, the precedent is, you said, Fylde got relegated last season. Under the agreement, that the teams below could have playoffs. Chester could compete, these clubs, to get up to the National League and take Fylde's place. So he sort of said, well, how important is precedent that now he and Fylde are being sort of robbed, if you like, if it did end, and obviously it now has ended, of a chance to take that back and get back up. And the point he said, obviously, is, well, where do you draw the line? Because you can't say, if you got to 30 games, you'd have to say, okay, we have to do the same as what we did last year, with some kind of points per game, some kind of playoffs, same type of thing. Where would you draw a line? Would we say 25 games, 20 games? I don't know what that line would be, but you'd have to definitely say, if you got to 30 games like we did last season, you'd have to do some kind of points per game. So if we did manage to stumble up until, that point last season, then you'd have to, let Fylde, if they got there, which, bar a massive sort of collapse, would have made it till the playoffs at 30 games, let them compete for their spot. And I completely agree with that. It's also that the awkward situation as well, is, well, then fans coming back, would fans be back for the last couple of games? How would that, could they, how far could you stretch that money then to, the fans coming back for the last couple of games? So would that cover this whole season? We don't know. That's the awkwardness as well of it. We've got this sort of weird dynamic. Also the dynamic of National League voted to, well, the initial sort of thing was, well, should leagues decide, should we split the National League up and National League regional, North and South, to have their own vote? And there's a National League, we'll have all clubs agreed in total. I think they needed, was it 75%, I think, to sort of say, we're going to vote for each league to have their own vote, 2 different votes. They agreed on that. National League said, yeah, we want to keep going. National League North said, we don't want to keep going overall. They had the National League, majority of National League clubs, let me clarify that, obviously. Majority of National League clubs said, we don't want to keep going. Majority of National League South clubs said they do want to keep going, but because the National League North and South were counted together, overall it went against National League South. So National League South will sort of feel a bit hard done by, because essentially they're sort of like they've been voted out by the North, if you like, and stuff like that. And that National League South argument would be, well, if National League are going to keep going, why can't we have some kind of promotion, if you like? Okay, only 2 go down from the National League or something, and we have 2 promotion places, or we have 4 promotion places. If the National League North can't keep going, fair enough. That's the argument I think a lot of National League South clubs would have made, if we're saying that everything else is sort of null and void below that, and not going on. And that's another thing as well, is that we don't know what's going to happen with that. As that whole situation is quite below National League North and South is quite messy, and that's a whole.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned the kind of that they'll feel aggrieved. But I think the same. I'm just getting tables back up on my phone because, you know, like I said earlier, there are a lot of clubs at this in the National League who've still got a chance to playoffs. It's so tight. Like I say, down to, well, even down to Chesterfield in 17th, who have played 18 games compared to, some teams played 23. They're not out of a shot with the playoffs. So a lot of teams have got a chance. It's only really the bottom 5 that have, will probably go down. You look at it, it's most likely going to be the current bottom 3, should if there were still to be relegations. Now, if I was, going back to your argument of a Firewood player, or, Gloucester, or one of those teams that are really doing well, you'd think, well, hang on a minute. Okay, the whole season hasn't been played. We have to remember that, because football's football, anything can happen. But those teams can feel really aggrieved because any other season, they've played well enough to earn their promotion up to the National League. And that's, for a lot of clubs, that is a massive step, from regional football to national, to national football. It can really make a difference. And you think for Fylde, the amount of money that they've pumped in over the last few years, millions they've pumped with the new stadium and everything. Gloucester, who I mentioned earlier, who I don't think they've been at National League level, and for them may not get another chance for a number of years. Who knows? He might bounce back and do it. Be just as good next season. But then you've got Kings Lynn, Barnet, Dover, all in the bottom 3, who really, if they all finish in the bottom 3, Dover looks like they will, because they're not going to play again, deserve to get relegated. And I think that disrupts the honesty and integrity of football. Because you also look, I mean, like I said, I think the fortunate thing is most teams in this league have still got a shot at the playoffs, and let's be honest, it kills me to say it, but as a Torquay fan, a lot of teams will fancy catching us. We're not on the greatest run of form at the moment. They'll think, well, hang on a minute, that we've got every chance of, the 3 or 4 teams below us, really down to, I'd say the 4 teams below us have all got the right to think that they can catch us. But for those 4 teams that may not feel they've got anything to play for, they could really hamper other team seasons by, so Kings Lynn, we played Kings Lynn. We drew away from home from them. They put up that it was quite a good game, apparently. One of the few I haven't watched this season. But it was to say that because they have nothing to play for now, they know they're safe, there's no relegation. What to say they're not going to furlough all of their first team, play a load of kids, and lose all of their games now, because it doesn't matter. So where we, drop 2 points against them, other teams could pick up points. So no relegations isn't good, really. I'm surprised that it changes the whole dynamic of the vote, but I'm surprised there wasn't an option to say, let's play up to half of the season or 2/3 of the season, and then finish it on points per game, and then do the playoffs. That's in the North and South. That's what I would have done.
That your point just made there about that I had actually thought before we started. I came up with some ideas for stuff beforehand, but I didn't think of this beforehand. Is that they're right about yeah, these teams down near the bottom who have now been told, yeah, no relegation, nothing to worry about. Could just turn around and sort of go, yeah, we're going to play a bunch of 16-year-olds. We're not bothered. We're going to lose 6-0. Bit like Bolton, similar to Bolton. Bolton, which they did at the start when they didn't have any first-team players. Yeah, we'll lose 5-0 every week. And those teams gained a massive sort of advantage, if you like. They were playing against, I'll say this respectfully, a bunch of 16, 17, 18-year-olds who'd never played first-team football before, compared to playing against some kind of first-team, well, not very good, you would say, and still got relegated. They're still professional players compared to a bunch of kids, you know, and stuff like that.
Of course, yeah.
And fans are going to be annoyed, and players are going to be annoyed essentially if they've played against, well, a weak team but a first team of professionals trying because they fear of being relegated compared to a bunch of 16-year-olds who, you know, a bunch of kids even like who've got no fear of being relegated, and you can whack them 5-0, and that's also goal difference is going to be important. Even if you win a 1-0 win against team bottom of the league compared to perhaps smashing them 6-0, that's a 5-point goal 5 goal difference. That's going to be a massive come end of the season if that is needed. So I think the point you make there about is very similar to what we saw the League Two last season with teams where it was like, well, you know, no one ended up getting relegated because we were like, Bury aren't here anymore, and there was essentially no relegation spot. So everyone down at the bottom was sitting their feet up, like, yeah, we're fine, pretty much, you know, because they knew what was going to happen, really. So, yeah. I think we've basically covered that. I think, is there anything else we haven't really sort of covered from the whole situation, really? Is there anything? I'm trying to think now. I don't think there is.
Yeah, I don't think so. Because we've mentioned everything, I think.
Yeah, right. So I mentioned everything. That's quite good. So I think a lot of people watching this will be the new people who've not been here before and stuff like that. So go and have a watch of somebody. Go and subscribe. That helps us out as well. Go and watch some other stuff. I think probably the best thing for people, if you're watching this because you're interested in hearing about the National League situation, like I said before, we did an interview with Alex Whitmore, AFC File player, and about 55 minutes into that, if you scroll back a few of the videos, he does a proper sort of rant, if you like, in discussion we had about that situation from a few weeks ago. It's a little bit outdated now, but that gives his thoughts as a player as to the whole sort of situation of last season and this season for what's gone on. And yeah, just thanks to you, mate, for taking time out for coming on and having a chat with us. And yeah, links in the description for all your Twitter and everything you do. And yeah, be sure to go and have a watch of that as well. But yeah,
Thanks for having me back.
Thanks for coming on, mate.